Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So here we are in the final week of the Article 50 period. Again. This time, however, a short extension is surely not on the cards. In addition, despite both Labour and the Prime Minister saying that they want to agree a Brexit deal, there was no movement whatsoever in the 3 days of talks last week, like no movement. And there's not been any talks scheduled, as far as I can tell, for this week. So if nothing else, we're at least not going to get a deal this week, because we'd have to agree the deal today to be able to put it to a vote from Parliament tomorrow, because on Wednesday, the Prime Minister's going to head to the EU Council to find out their decision. Now, we have requested an extension that will most certainly not be granted till the 30th of June, just like we did last time. We've offered to take part in European elections, should we still be in the EU on May the 23rd. So that goes some way. But also, the Prime Minister desperately wants to avoid it, she made clear. So the Council knows that the government party will fight a war over what should be an inconsequential issue for the UK. But of course, with Brexit, there's no such thing as an inconsequential issue. So one possible outcome is that EU Council refuse a further extension of Article 50. They just go, do you know what? No. We've not come up with a credible plan to conclude matters, which was one of their requirements. The risk of the UK exiting the EU without a deal whilst European elections are taking place around much more settled nations has the potential to be seized upon by populists in those nations. They don't want that. The view seems to be that either people around the rest of the EU need to see just how damaging a no-deal Brexit is before those elections, and that can only happen if the UK leaves like now, or those same people need to see that when push comes to shove, even the most Eurosceptic member state, i.e. the UK, doesn't want to go, or at least is incapable of doing so in a tidy manner. To have any of that in doubt by risking the UK leaving at round about the time of the elections, but before the consequences are seen, is not acceptable. Because let's face it, if we go out with no deal, there will be, there's a lot of Leave supporters still, not pretending there aren't, and they'll be cheering and whooping and hollering like we're about to enter another golden age. The hangover from that will not appear immediately. It will take a few weeks. So to have that period of time happen after the elections and it's all too late, that's not acceptable. So that is entirely credible. There were already council members last time who wanted to get rid of us then. They didn't want to even give us the 2-week extension. They held on for the sake of Ireland and because there was some little hope. This time, as I say, in their minds, things might be different. So, if the Council refuse, the UK has 2 options. And when I say the UK, I mean Parliament. 1, we can all go to the pub and get pissed. Well, we can do that as well. Waving goodbye to the last vestiges of our credibility in the world as we crash out with no deal. Then the court cases can begin. Or 2, Parliament can vote to revoke Article 50, then more court cases would begin, but from the other side. Mind you, those wouldn't go anywhere. Now, one of our stalwart friendly Brexiteers keeps trying to tell us here on the channel that we've already left and we just don't know it yet, and that there's a court case to prove that we actually did leave on March the 29th. Now, there is certainly a court case, but it hinges on the notion, because I've read it, that the Prime Minister had no authority to unilaterally agree to the extension. Now, that may be true. I don't know that that's not true. That's actually possibly credible. But the issue is that Parliament also voted for it. So there's no argument about the fact that we are still very much in the EU because Parliament certainly has the right to do that. Despite what a few passports say, we're still members of the EU. But I would still be interested in the ruling. I am following that. And as soon as there's a ruling, I'm going to be very interested in that because I want to know whether the Prime Minister does have the right to unilaterally do things without Parliament, because that could be very useful for Remainers such as myself later. But anyway, I have said in the past that revoking without a referendum is politically impossible. But at the very edge of ruin, I suppose anything is politically possible. The Labour Shadow Business Secretary this weekend, whilst trying to be as tentative as possible, did suggest that Labour might just get behind revoking Article 50 if the only other possible option was a no-deal Brexit. They have said that they would do whatever they could to avoid going out with no deal. That basically means, as the interviewer themselves put it, revoking Article 50 at the very end. So that would get the backing of 90% of Labour MPs. That's no problem. It would get most other opposition MPs as well. There'd be, again, probably about a dozen that wouldn't. But its success would still therefore be dependent upon some Conservative MPs. It wouldn't need a massive number, but it would need some. Now, there are a number who would support this move, who would even rebel to support this move, but it would be much easier for them if the Prime Minister did as well and said, yes, we should do this. Now, this weekend, when we're trying to consider the credibility of the Prime Minister getting behind it, she gave a painful to watch address to the nation again. This time sat awkwardly on a sofa with her head rolling around like it was full of giant ball bearings. And in it, she said that the choice for us was between a negotiated Brexit deal with Labour or no Brexit at all. The no deal had gone from her list of options this time. Now, this could just be her trying to pressure Labour into doing something or to try and make Labour responsible if we do leave without a deal. It might simply be her trying to absolve herself of blame if we do go out without a deal because, well, she stopped talking about a no-deal Brexit. Can't be her fault, can it? Now, one of the patrons of this channel did link me a news article from ITV on Patreon where the case was being made that this is evidence that Theresa May has adopted a policy of not allowing a no-deal Brexit. But there are two things that are missed in this argument. One is that the Prime Minister cannot unilaterally revoke Article 50. A court already determined that she needed a parliamentary vote to invoke it, so the same surely has to be true to revoke it. That means she'd need to whip her MPs to vote in favour of a revocation. Now, that would certainly cause the vote to succeed. There will be plenty of ones who would say, yeah, Prime Minister, I'm going to absolutely vote for you, along with the opposition to get it through. No problem at all. But it threatens to cause that almighty split in her precious party. Many of the MPs on her side would rebel and vote against it. Wouldn't be enough. And they would not do so quietly. It would be all-out war for the Tories. 2. The Conservatives' own manifesto said that a no deal was better than a bad deal. Now, many took this to mean that the Conservatives were promising that we would definitely leave the EU, even if it meant without a deal. Now, that isn't technically what the manifesto said, just that no deal is better than a bad deal. They didn't say no deal was better than no Brexit, for example. But the implication was there. A lot of people who still support Leave will be hopping mad, absolutely furious, if she seems to go against the implications in her own manifesto. Not that a manifesto means very much at all if you're in a minority government where loads of your own MPs keep voting against your manifesto promises, because that's what's happening. I'll keep coming back to it. The arch Brexiteers in her party keep voting against Brexit. That's the bottom line. Now, in circumstances like that, it's actually quite reasonable to abandon those manifesto promises and say, well, do you know what? I've tried to bring them into being and I can't. But somehow I don't think that opponents to such a move would take such a charitable view. The final possible outcome is that the EU Council agrees with Donald Tusk's proposal. He has suggested a long extension, which could be cut short if we agree a deal to leave. Now, it would need the whole council to believe that the tide is really turning in the UK and that there is a clear will not to allow a no-deal Brexit. But it would be against a background of knowing that the British Parliament was now so unstable that a general election could easily be called before anything else happens. That might return a Eurosceptic Prime Minister with a majority who would simply pull the plug on the whole thing. Now, I don't think that's likely, but it can't be ruled out, in which case the EU would have the nightmare scenario of the UK crashing out at just the time that it is most unhelpful for the rest of the EU. They'd be taking an awful lot on trust. But those are the possible outcomes as we may judge them from what the various parties have been saying. It will not be that long before we find out what the conclusion of this week's going to be because, well, it's this week. So let me know what you think is going to happen in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content and click the bell notification as well, please. And until next time, I'll see you later.